What's up, guys?
How you doing, Matt?
I love morning energy, don't you?
I just came out of a 45-minute meditation, so I don't know what you're going to get out of me this morning.
I just came out of a very intense tapping session. Jessica, you ever had one of those?
Yes, it feels very good, and it's strangely delightful in a confusing way that I don't understand, but it's lovely.
I'm so glad you said that, because you give me permission to say the following thing. Like, I almost cried at one point. I was like, wow, like it like really tapped into like a very weird spot that I've never been to before. And it was very fascinating, actually.
I love that.
Yeah, it was cool. You ever seen The Matrix?
Oh, yes.
You know, when they're sitting in that white room and they're like, guns, we need guns. And all of a sudden, like 5 million guns show up. Like, I kind of feel like I was in that room. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, all right, I can't tell if this is like a void of like terror or if it's a void of like a blank canvas. Like I was like kind of like really not sure where that was, right? So
that's really cool. It's almost like you had the choice to maybe create what it was, but weren't sure if what or how.
If what or how. That's exactly right. So I was like, so now I'm Tom's all meditated. I'm like in a white matrix room, and you know, I don't know. We'll figure out where Jessica's at. But
well, let's see what happens.
Well, where I'm at, I was just putting wood in my wood burning stove because it's my only source of heat. It's about 8 a.m. over here in California in the redwood forest, and my toilet's getting replaced, so I'm peeing in the forest until it gets replaced later today.
Wow! So you're in a whole different kind of place. I love this. We are in
that's not too bad.
Yeah. Isn't it kind of chilly out there to be peeing in the forest though right now?
Well, I mean,
I guess you can get your cold therapy.
Yeah, it kind of wakes up a little, and it's honestly, it's Northern California coast. It's like we've gotten a few frost, a little frost on the grass in the morning, but it's probably in the 40s.
Okay, so it's not.
That's not too bad.
50s.
Yeah,
it's in the low 50s right now. It's not.
Yeah,
bad.
your pee's not freezing on its way out, kind of thing, just yet.
No,
we're not quite there yet. Yeah.
I mean,
I gotta say, any chance I get, I'll pee outside.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I definitely will.
Yeah.
We went to the Kiss concert here a couple weeks ago, which was awesome, by the way. I have to just tell you, like, I haven't ever seen Kiss, but the teenage boy in me was like, oh my God, it's Kiss's last tour. And as it turns out, we were the second to last show. Like, New York City was their last show. Baltimore was their second. And there was like a really fun energy there. They were kind of like, we're fucking done. So like we're leaving it all on the stage kind of thing, right? Like they just had a blast with it. And we came back, and the woman who gave us a ride home, my buddy was with me. He's like, dude, I really got to pee. Do you mind if I use your bushes? She goes like, I don't care. The next day, her neighbor sends out a Ring camera of him peeing there and then posts it to our community board.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
And she's like, what kind of Neanderthal would do this? I was like, I know that guy.
Well, I have over 400 nights professionally clocked sleeping on the ground and living outside and getting paid for it.
Wow.
And so I have a lot of outdoor experience with that type of thing. But once I was caught accidentally in front of a trail cam. All of a sudden, doing that midnight pee, and then all of a sudden I see this red light flashing on me, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Whoops. Yeah, wrong spot.
And I was a college student, and it was a field trip, and I know the professor would check the...
Yeah.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
I mean, it could have been worse. You could have gotten like a hankering to do some other self-exploration activities, which could have been way more awkward.
Oh, yeah. I was just interested in going back to sleep in the treehouse fort on that field.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Cool.
So this actually might be a great segue into this.
I was like, wow, that's a kind of naturally veering in that direction.
Yeah. So before we get into like what might be my favoriteest topic ever that we've talked about on this, I have to ask, like, the spotted owl. You got to walk me through this a little bit. Okay. Let's talk about that real quick, shall we?
Yes. So I am a former wildlife biologist, and I now help men overcome pornography addiction, and that is a very long distance away from being a wildlife biologist. And I used to work for a timber harvest company with about 300,000 acres, and I would go out with my dog, my ATV, my bear spray, my machete, and my hiking boots. And I would use my voice to hoot in the forest and find the owls and specifically their nest locations. And I would count the nestlings and the fledglings. And if we found them, then essentially there would be about 1,000-foot radius protection around the nest tree in the timber harvest plan. And no tree can get touched during the chick rearing season. And so the northern spotted owl is actually at risk of going extinct. And a lot of people initially thought it was due to just the deforestation and taking down all the old growth redwood trees and the Doug firs because they need these they're owls, they're not nest builders, they're nest finders. And oftentimes they'll just be like, I need a branch that is as thick as 3 human men, and that is where I'm going to find a nook and cranny to put my nest, to lay my eggs.
Yeah.
We'll find places. And so essentially it was actually, there's less than 5% of the old growth forest left of the redwoods.
Wow.
Wow.
The actual biggest danger right now is the invasive species of the eastern barred owl. Not barn, but barred, B-A-R-R-E-D. Vertical stripes going down their front. And they are more aggressive, more territorial, and they are basically kind of out competing the more docile spotted owl here. And interestingly enough, there is going to, I keep getting, the algorithm knows what I like.
Yeah.
I keep getting articles about in 2025, there's going to be actually a big hiring of people to go shoot and lethally kill. I don't know the number, maybe hundreds of thousands. Don't quote me on the number. I'd have to recheck that on the barred owl to lethally shoot and remove them as an attempt to prevent the extinction of the native northern spotted owl here in Northern California.
How did we get the barred owl into the equation? Like, where did that come from? Do we know?
I love that question.
Yeah. Where did he come from?
They came here via forest corridor. So a corridor is something we can travel along, and these are forest owls, and they basically, there's more forested acres here in North America than there were pre-colonial times, but the mosaic of the forest is different. We have significantly less old growth and a lot more new, younger forest tree stands. And those basically provided enough forested area for the barred owl to make its way from east to west coast.
Oh, wow.
Now they're here. They had the forest acres to get here.
That's crazy. And how long did that take? Like, is this decades, or was this like a few years, or like millennia?
Probably many decades. I don't know the history.
Yeah, I was just curious. Is this a fast-moving process or not?
I mean, as fast as trees can grow.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. All right. So you're into owls. That's awesome. But like, that seems awesome. Like, everything you just said seems really fucking cool. Like, I don't know why. What got you out of owls? Like that.
Yeah.
Brain damage.
Brain damage. Okay.
Yeah. So in 2016, when I was, we were fresh in the owl season, I was really excited. I had gone on a 3-day weekend rock climbing trip with a few friends. There were about 6 of us out there, and we all packed our own food. And I love oysters, and I happened to eat the wrong batch of smoked canned oysters. That sent me on a 5-year recovery journey and gave me brain damage.
5-year recovery journey?
Wait, was this an amoebic parasite? What are we talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a non-living chemical compound called ciguatera.
Okay.
So the oyster, they eat single-celled organisms, and essentially through its siphoning organ where it eats whatever, it ate some ciguatera, basically a single-celled organism that has ciguatera in it. Okay. And essentially that organism died when the oyster ate it, but that is it's toxic in the human body at like 0.01 parts per billion. It's insane. Sea mammals die of cardiac arrest when they eat fish. Normally it's bony fish associated with the coral reef is how you get ciguatera. You go to like Hawaii and there are signs on the beach for like the fishermen to be aware of. French Polynesia is where there's the highest rate per capita of people getting ciguatera neurotoxin illness. Most people do not get it chronically like I did, but I got it very chronically, and it actually put a 19 millimeter lesion on the left front lobe of my brain. It passes through the blood-brain barrier. It causes the myelin sheath to unravel like MS, like multiple sclerosis. It has basically an enormous amount of overlapping symptoms of MS, extreme toxic mold exposure, Lyme's disease.
Wow.
Like all of them combined in one. And it did things like I was at extreme high risk of cardiac arrest. I was in and out of the emergency room. It was very terrifying. And even after every meal, you're at risk of cardiac arrest. I actually know a medical doctor who's a pediatrician, and she had acquired this as well, and she knew the dangers of it as she was learning, and she was so terrified. She literally ate every single meal in the emergency room parking lot, just like for a long time I slept in the emergency room parking lot in the back of my 4Runner because I needed to be near a defibrillator, just like she knew she needed to be near one after every meal. So I always knew
Jesus.
You always know your proximity to the closest hospital or a defibrillator because of how high risk cardiac arrest is.
And does that risk mitigate after it kind of works its way through your system? Is that like a permanent problem that you got to keep on your radar now forever?
I don't worry about it at all.
Okay.
At all. Essentially, once these neurotoxins leave your body, which can be very difficult for anyone who's ever struggled with like toxic mold, for example, which is much more common. Like, how hard it really can be. And so I was on all of these fat soluble binders, and with Ciguatera neurotoxin, it has a water soluble, an alcohol soluble, and a fat soluble end. And it's this really complex molecule that persists the highest cooking temperatures that you could ever cook food at. It stays perfectly stable and doesn't denature.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's crazy. This feels like a Dave Asprey situation or one of those, like hyper niche stories where you're like, what the fuck? Like,
yeah, I actually recently had someone reach out to me who has a podcast called Invisible Illnesses. And they're like, will you please let us interview you?
Seriously. So when we spoke last time, you had some kind of mold exposure. I mean, is this on your radar because of this experience? I would imagine that that's not a coincidence that you were dealing with that.
Correct. To my knowledge, I was never sensitive enough to black toxic mold that I was never aware of it if I was in its presence. And now I am aware of it.
Yeah, for sure.
My body has created this hypersensitivity to it as a result of my Ciguatera experience. And, there's that saying in neuroscience, neurobiology, nerves that fire together, wire together. And my subconscious mind goes, oh, that neurotoxic, that microscopic neurotoxin, we know what to do.
The trip that you were on, like, were you just, I mean, what happens? You eat this can of oysters and 20 minutes later you're throwing up everywhere, or like or are they hiking you off the mountain? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So I wish that I was throwing up. I wish that I was losing it out of both ends because it would have helped to eliminate
Yeah.
I wasn't lucky enough to have that experience.
Okay.
And so literally the next day was when we were driving back home, done with the climbing trip, and it took almost a full day to have the first set of symptoms, which is actually common. And there were 6 of us, 3 vehicles. I was in a van. Thank goodness, one of the men in the van, he was a wilderness certified EMT. And I noticed, something I wasn't feeling right in a really bizarre way. And it started in my teeth, in one particular tooth, actually. And it eventually got to feeling like if I were to touch my teeth, they would fall out.
Oof.
which I later came to learn is a common symptom of ciguatera neurotoxin illness.
Teeth actually falling out or just feeling like they could
Just
fall
a
out?
sensation.
Just
the
a sensation.
sensation. Okay.
Yeah, no actual risk of it falling out. There was no physical degradation or anything like that happening. It was just, but it felt so real. It was like, oh my gosh, if I gently touch my teeth, they're going to fall out. And it was.
There's a movie on Netflix called Leave the World Behind, which I regrettably watched. And he gets blasted with some kind of crazy EMF thing. And the 2 days later, all of his teeth fell out. That's why I'm asking. I'm like, wow, what other teeth losing situations can we find ourselves in? And I looked it up, and apparently that has happened in the past. I'm like, Jesus, I didn't know there was a family of things that make your teeth fall out.
Wait, that was real, not just like some sci-fi movie?
I mean, in the movie, it was obviously embellished for theatrical effect, but apparently in areas where they did high electromagnetic experimentation, local populations lost teeth en masse. Not everybody in the population, but people in it would just have like teeth just fall out of their head. Like just
It's terrifying.
It's I was watching it like, oh my just
I have to ask that Shiva system guy if that's a known side effect of the brain device.
So the lesion on your brain, speaking of brains, like what are we talking about like long term with that? Like what do you have a fix on what that created?
Oh, I'm a master at self-healing, so my brain functions better now than it did before brain damage.
Oh, perfect.
Because of the healing protocol I created for myself, and partially that was sparked by a functional medicine doctor, Chris Kresser, who started putting me on a brain retraining program to reduce the hypervigilance of the limbic system, but that only took me so far. It helped tremendously. Then I went on to use things like meditation, like an hour. Dr. Joe dispenses meditations, I swear, saved my life, an hour every day. And then one of his 7-day advanced meditation retreats. And holy shit, that was, wow. I swear, it literally felt like my brain turned into these like large sand granules that rearranged themselves and healed itself. That's just the physical sensation I experienced. I don't know what was actually going on in my brain, but holy moly, it was crazy.
But that hyperactive limbic system, I mean, and it, I guess what raised my radar here is you saying like meditation kind of brought that back down to earth. Is there sort of a psychosomatic component to this that sort of perpetuates long after the insult because your brain is just stuck in this loop?
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up because a lot of people who have, especially things like mold, that's the more common one people know about, is a lot of people just focus on, I need to get the mold out of my body and I need to remove myself from the physical environment. But if that's all you do, you didn't actually fix the problem because the neurology in the subconscious mind is still going haywire and it can still cause extreme amounts of anxiety or insomnia or bring out childhood PTSD or trauma can start to like emerge. Things like sensitivity to lights or loud noises, chronic fatigue, HPA axis dysregulation, all sorts of things there's a bit of brain retraining to essentially bring back a sense of safety into your neurology. And when I say safety, what I really mean by that it's a neurochemical set of elevated oxytocin and serotonin, especially that oxytocin component. To your subconscious mind, that's the definition of safety.
Right.
And so oftentimes someone will have inappropriate emotional responses, even though they are in a physically safe environment and situation, but their neurology is not matching the situation. That's
fascinating. And we talked not on camera about the tapping and just to kind of, I did that today, which is why it's kind of fresh on my mind. But what's fascinating about that is you're sort of short circuiting your conscious mind to tap directly into your central nervous system. And by reinforcing it on all of the pressure points, and Tom probably could talk better, but it's like, basically it's like this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then this one. It's like in that order. and you just repeat it. And and it's funny, as you complete a cycle, you could literally, and Tom and I were texting this earlier. The practitioner said, you're very fifth and sixth chakra dominant. And your problem is that your energy's too high. You need to feel your feet more. When you're in this mode, feel your toes. Like, just feel what your feet are doing, because what you need to do is you got to bring that energy down to your root chakra so that energy can be reallocated from fight or flight to a more parasympathetic, response. And I said, fuck, that all makes a lot of sense, but it took somebody else looking from the outside in, which is why I'm like sitting here. You're saying things that all kind of really feel very similar to that sort of thing. Like, hey, I gotta rewire my head to get this to work.
Exactly. Yeah. And part of that rewiring, the way that, there's so many different amazing healing modalities that work out there. And one of the most fundamental things is your trust in the process you choose. Because the stronger amount you trust the process, the better it actually works on you. And
yeah,
Tom, we've talked about that on this show a lot.
It's funny because it's, some people might call that placebo, but it's not even, I think we were saying, like, if you believe it, that is the right way. I mean, we talk about that with diet. We talk about that with everything, right? We can do things as so much as we believe we can.
Exactly. And with that, it is a form of placebo, but I don't even like that term because of what people think about it.
Sure.
I actually created a new term for it, which is strength of mind technique.
Okay.
Because
I'll help you spread that around. That sounds way cooler than placebo.
Strength of mind.
Yeah.
Okay. If we all know about the clinical trials and the placebo effect and the sugar pill, and someone gets the actual desired results that can be measured in a lab.
Mm-hmm.
They're real measurable changes. And that was a sugar pill, you could call it. And what it really was strength of mind technique, and your belief, your strength of how much you trust it was the dictating factor. So if we go into a healing modality, the more that we trust it, it's essentially, you could call it placebo effect or strength of mind technique, but that's changing your epigenetics. That's changing your blood chemistry. That's changing so much. It can be rewiring. The way that I do it a lot of times with my clients, and what I had to do with myself first, is identify all of the limiting patterns. And these are patterns of belief, patterns of choices and behaviors and reactions. And these are patterns that are subconsciously programmed, that are changing our epigenetics, changing our emotional states, changing the quality of our life. So when we can identify all of these subconscious programs that are patterns that we have to first identify them. That's step one. I actually have a process to this. It's called the 3Ds.
And it's funny that you're getting into this, because this is actually what I was going to ask you right before you started, was saying, is all of this clarity that you got really the on-ramp to where you're at now? And it seems like that answer is yes. So yeah, I have read a little bit about it. So I was going to also ask you about the 3D. So like we're right in it here. Like just
there we go.
Yeah.
Yes. Basically my own, and I can kind of go into that later if you want a little bit more of the reason why it was helping men with pornography addiction is what I do now. But when I was coming up,
that's where I want to get to for sure. Yeah. But this is this is perfect, because like it seems like to me, and not to put words in your mouth, but it feels like this was an accidental yet completely predictable path from where you were accidentally to where you ended up. It's like, oh my God, I have all this clarity that I didn't have.
Yes.
And if I have this superpower over here doing this thing, what the hell else could I do with it? Right? Like, it feels very much like that's what I'm getting.
And it's more than just clarity, because the clarity was acquired first through immense suffering, followed by immense healing. So there's a very, very strong emotional attachment to the clarity, which makes me driven to do something with it. And we can call it my life purpose if you want.
Sure.
That is so funny, because like you're describing pretty much right flooding of the amygdala over to the left right there too. Like, oh my God, this is a horrible traumatic thing. And oh, no. Now we found our purpose and joy.
Yeah. It's the intellectual clarity with the emotional attachment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's funny. I worked with a coach once who asked me a question under a lot of LSD influence, but he said, at the moment just before your father ejaculated in your mother, what made you choose human form? I'd never been asked a question like this before in my life. I was like so floored by the just preposterousness of that question. But it led to several years of very intense inward like introspection on that, because I'm like, all right, let's just assume for a moment that that is a thing, that I got to choose my human form. And then I had breakfast with a mutual friend of Tom and I's, Brian, and he said, yeah, you know, you go up, you finish one life, you go up, you hang out with your soul family. I'm like, you're what? Like, and it just like, you know, like, so the onion kept peeling back more and more. But like, when I started to play with the idea, I'm like, all right, so what if you could choose it? That idea of what that choice was, I don't think is really clear in anybody's mind. So I think candidly, I've gotten more clarity about what mine probably is, if that makes sense, but I haven't quite dove in. And it feels like you kind of had that answered for you when you had this experience. You're like, well, wait a minute. No, this is it. Like, I got it. Like, I feel very directionally accurate. Like,
and that's a really fun question, actually. And I love the presupposition in there of it, the assumption that we get to choose, which makes it our subconscious mind then believes the assumption, which is
for sure
a whole other layer. But when, you know, I actually had my spiritual awakening during my healing journey. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and then I was atheist for like my 20s, and then I had this spiritual awakening and during my, you know, healing journey. And I mean, getting brain damage and hypersexuality disorder and all this stuff, literally it feels like the greatest gift that the universe has ever handed to me on a silver platter.
It's awesome.
And it's
that's great. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, that feeling, listen, I don't know about you, Tom, but I cannot put myself in that mindset. Like, I can't feel that, and I want to because it looks so awesome.
You know, I think, God, there was, I know we talked about this before, the stroke researcher that got a stroke, and her immediate response while it was happening was, oh my God, this is amazing. I actually have firsthand experience of this.
This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Yeah. You're like, but you can't walk. Yeah, that's cool. We're all good.
Oh, yeah. But the brain's okay. We're all right.
Yeah.
I love listening to her experience. It is amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, it's hard to imagine, like, if you haven't taken that leap. And like, speaking of leaps, I mean, it still is a bit, I mean, it's more clear, but building that bridge still between spotted owl and porn addiction, where it's
and the other thing is, this is a very clear strength of mindset too, because you can look at this as, this ruined my life, and clearly this informed and gave my life purpose.
Yeah, it almost started your life, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it sort of like, you know. All right, so we're feeling good about ourselves. We're getting clarity. We're healing up. Like, what was the first sort of like step towards porn recovery? Which, by the way, is super specific. Let's call that out here.
It is specific. And well, I will touch on something that Tom said a moment ago, which was because for a number of years I was stuck in the victim mindset of my life is over, my life is ruined. I mean, it was so bad. Actually, one of my layers of addiction became telling my victim story to kind and compassionate, empathetic people because of the response I would get back from them. And that became one of my biggest sources of like an adult security blanket that doesn't actually cause any healing. It's temporary, momentary relief. But I became addicted to telling my victim story, which reinforced it to be true about myself, which strengthened the neural pathways, all of the symptoms and challenges and limiting beliefs and everything that I was experiencing. And so I was stuck there for years. And it wasn't until I forced myself, and it was so challenging, to change the perspective in which I tell my story from one that people are no longer having to have pity on me, but they're excited for my journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard thing to wrap your head around. I mean, just on this call, we've talked about a dozen things that from an outside perspective, could be considered super woo woo or like a little bit, pseudoscience. You pick the word you want to use. But like when you look at all of them, like they're all meaningful and they all actually lead to places, right? But we're not, I think societally, not to get too esoteric, but like as a species in 2023, we're not really acclimated to that wavelength anymore, right? Like we don't ask those questions.
Right.
You got to be some brain damaged hiker from Northern California to have some kind of like question and answer thrust upon you. You know what I mean? Like it's weird to me always whenever I hear these things,
Well, there's no computer programming book for your brain, right? There's no, hey, we put this input in and there's too many variables, too many stimuli, right? The pathways might be the same for an addiction in porn as they are with heroin, or even telling your sad tale and being stuck in that repeat pattern, right? We reinforce that neurologically, but getting out of that can be very unique for people. I don't, and Jessica, I'm sure everybody comes to like porn addiction with a certain, there's a reason they end up there, but
sure.
Getting out it may not always be one size fits all,
But even that, like, and maybe we start the porn segment of our conversation with this question: what makes me want to seek help for this, right? Like, I mean, like
well, maybe we should even back up further and say, what is it?
Because that's great. Let's
every
frame
once
this
in a while I hop on Pornhub, or like, am I calling in sick to work and I have chafing?
Yeah. Let's draw a box around this best we can. That's a great suggestion, Tom.
So, what is porn addiction? That's the question.
Yeah, let's start there. Yeah, like,
let's start like when is too much, if you will?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only way to really answer that is to know what the definition of addiction is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And addiction, a lot of people think addiction is just, pursuing that pleasurable thing. I want that instant gratification, but that's a part of it. But ultimately, addiction is an escape from the pain so much more than it is a run towards the pleasure. It's an escape from the pain that exists in that individual's subconscious mind and their neurology and their emotional experience. And if you're familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate, he's one of my heroes, and he is a world-leading expert on addiction, ADHD, and trauma. They're all related, is merely a symptom of unresolved trauma. And trauma, then it's like, okay, well, we have to define that if we're putting it into the definition of addiction. To put it very loosely, strongly unresolved, strong emotional wounds of the past. Unresolved emotional wounds of the past that are really strong, right? And Dr. Gabor Mate takes it a step further. And listening to him articulate it helped me so much more understand and articulate it. And so it's, as a child, most children who experience trauma, it's not the type of trauma that we're accustomed to hearing about. And most adults who have childhood trauma unresolved are unaware of it. Because most people think of trauma as that sexual abuse, that verbal abuse, that getting beaten, that, those very, very obvious things. And of course, those cause trauma in the neurology of a developing child. But the most common form of trauma is when the basic needs, especially those emotional needs of a child, are unmet, which is very common. So, for example, having a parent who's not emotionally available, or who doesn't allow safe expression of whatever it is that child needs to express in any form, in any emotional form. And it's really common for parents to say, like, oh, stop yelling, stop crying, don't yell right now, rather than saying, like, I know you're upset. Yeah. You say, we'll use a 2-year-old where he's not getting the cookie, for example. Like, yeah, I know you're angry. Yes, I understand you're angry. You can totally, just let it out. It's okay to be angry that you don't have the cookie. Yeah, you be angry. And so that allows the kid to feel safe enough for expression. And because the moment that a child doesn't feel safe for emotional expression because of what, someone says, usually it's a parent, but it's not always. Now the subconscious mind of that child says, oh, I am not lovable when I express this part of who I am. The only way for me to survive is to be lovable because I'm dependent on a parent, on a caregiver. Obviously, there's nothing in the conscious rational mind doing that. That's all in the subconscious programming. That's what the subconscious mind receives as a message. And so what does it do? That now that authentic part of that child begins to subconsciously repress itself. The moment, right there, in that moment, boom, trauma. That individual doesn't feel safe to be who they are in this world. And now that creates a insecurity in the subconscious mind. That insecurity is going to manifest in ways it'll be anxiety or narcissism or depression or feelings of low self-worth, low self-esteem, low confidence, many different ways. And if that individual doesn't feel safe enough to reconnect with those parts that it was subconsciously repressing, now that individual as an adult has a way higher risk of addiction because their neurology still feels unsafe. And the neurochemicals that are received during the addictive experience provide a false sense of security in the nervous system. It's the adult security blanket.
So knowing that there's a bunch of ways you could scratch that itch, have you noticed any sort of corollary or propensity, if you will, where like this type of trauma leads to a cocaine addiction versus this one leads to a porn addiction? Or is it pretty much dealer's choice? Like trauma needs to be healed somehow or dealt with, and whatever your poison is your poison.
Yeah, not like, so the trauma received, when there's a sexual trauma, that can definitely create a higher risk of having a sexual addiction. For sure.
Got it.
Makes sense. Yeah.
It does, but it doesn't, right? It's almost paradoxical, right? Yeah, like if you have like a sexual trauma, you would think like, oh wait, hold on, I don't want to get sexual anymore because the last time this happened.
I can see it going either way, though.
No, I can too. I
completely
just think
asexual,
yeah.
or you're like, well, this is how adults
this is normal.
interact, and this is what I'm expected to do.
Right.
And that part of you that was stunted in that trauma as a child is like, yeah, let's do this because this is what you want. Yeah.
It totally can go either way. It absolutely can go either way. And I know that statistically, 1 in 6 boys are sexually molested as children. 1 in 6. So you have a class. Yeah. I learned this from Lewis Howes, who, if you're familiar with Lewis Howes, School of Greatness, I think is the name of his podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I am not.
He was like a Olympic team handball player, I think is one of his accolades. But he started, he has dyslexia or something too that he overcame. Something.
Yeah, he's overcome a lot, and he spoke about when he was a little boy, I think maybe around 5 years old, and he was sexually molested. And in his adult life, his teenage and adult life, he had friends who were basically almost saying like, hey, I don't want to be your friend anymore because of how you're acting out. He was having fits of rage. He was having fits of rage, and he eventually realized that was tied back from his the time when he was a little boy that he was sexually molested, and how he had suppressed it, he hid it, he didn't talk to anyone about it, and there were so many very strong emotions still tied to that event. Hopelessness and anger and fear and deep shame, all bottled up.
Yeah, sure. So you say you focus on men. This seems like it's sort of a unisex problem, right?
It is.
Yeah. Is there a differentiator that puts you in one camp or the other, or no?
So I kind of, to back up with that a little, so I do work with men. The reason for that is I'm just compelled. I feel compelled for that. And I think the reason for that is during 3 years of my healing journey, I was with a man on and off who was very severely addicted to pornography. Super addicted. also to alcohol, and would, just do casual cocaine a couple times a week.
So not to put too fine a point on this, but when we say hyper addicted to porn, are we talking like, is there some sort of like numerator here we could kind of attach this? I just want to paint a picture here.
Yeah, we just want to make sure our consumption is healthy.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, look, a little bit of that, but a lot of it is like, okay, look, I definitely look at porn. There's no question about that. But I also consume cannabis. I also drink. Those two I usually do on a daily basis. But I guess the way I've always phrased it in my own narrative is I do them because I enjoy it. I grew up in Napa, like outside of Napa. Jessica, you know the area. Like wine is like a condiment in my house, right? Like, so I don't consider wine alcohol even. Like, it's weird. It's like, no, I don't drink. I drink wine. Like, that's not alcohol. That doesn't count. I'm like, of course it counts, you dum-dum. Yes, it's 100%. But like, I have this very blasé relationship with it. And I'm not waking up in the morning. This is my justification, right? I'm not saying any of this is right, but I wake up in the morning. I don't think about drinking or smoking. I don't spend a single moment of my day thinking about, obsessing about, dreaming about, yearning for, lusting after, none of it. But at the end of the day, when shit's done, I'm pouring myself a glass of wine. Ain't no two ways about it. When Tom and I jump on this podcast, I am smoking a joint or something. Like, it is part of my nightly routine, not part of my life routine, if that makes sense, right? It's like, and so like, hey, I'm a pretty open-minded guy. Is that addiction? Like, am I at this intersection, right? And so like, I'm just trying to kind of, and I don't think I'm the only one that would ask this question when hearing this, right? Like, it's kind of like, oh, well, what the fuck is addiction when it comes to this, right? Like, so that's kind of the spirit of where I'm coming from with this.
Yeah, usually if the thought of giving it up gives you a stress response, that could be a red flag.
Got it.
To think about.
That does not affect me at all. I go through regular bouts where I don't think about it.
It's pretty funny because like everything I would use, I'm like, yeah, I can put it down. I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I regularly do the whole dry insert random month here, like, and like, it's never bothered me except for like, if there's a time during that period of time where I'm like, I have a client dinner or something, like, I've actually ordered a drink of seltzer water in a cocktail glass specific with a lime so that my clients don't get uneasy, right? Like,
yeah.
And I know that's a completely batshit crazy thing to do, but it's like I'm in advertising, and advertising is deeply seated in alcohol and drug use, like deeply rooted. Like, the golf course is the bar in my industry, right? And so when you say people, I'm not drinking tonight, they're like, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? Should I be worried?
Yeah. Well, kind of going back to your earlier question of like, I don't remember the word I even used about, super addicted, massively addicted.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. Addicted.
So with my partner, he was so addicted to it that the neural pathways in his brain became to basically every time you watch something sexual on a digital screen, you build stronger neural pathways for being turned on by that, essentially. And that can then take away and kind of reduce the neural pathways for being turned on in a sexual experience with a real partner.
Oh, interesting.
And so my partner, he would actually reject my sexual advances like 99% of the time.
Oh, that must have been reassuring.
And so it was that right there caused significantly more, rejection, subconscious low self-worth, like all these feelings of inadequacy, not good enough, which
for you,
yeah, that sounds awful.
So it was really challenging, really challenging.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Since my brain damage had created hypersexuality disorder, which is extreme sexual urges, like tortures, like it's not fun.
Wow, so that was definitely a weird cocktail for sure, right? Like that definitely had to be challenging to navigate.
Extremely.
Would have been challenging to navigate without the porn addicted boyfriend.
Right.
Partner, yeah.
Yeah, it would have been infinitely more so having to deal with both of those simultaneously.
But then, so I have a weird question here, Jessica, and I hope it doesn't come across like I'm trying to word it as sensitively as possible. if you have a hypersexuality type mindset, not even due to what are you doing with a partner? Why wouldn't you have like a Rolodex? Dating myself by saying Rolodex.
Yes, yes.
We all still know what it is, Tom. It's fine.
This group does. That doesn't land at my office.
So when, I was saying like him and I were on and off, usually he would be the one to break it off because he was another one of my addictions that I had.
I see.
And so I intensely craved the sexual experience with him. Specifically. And the way that addictions can work is you can become addicted to people, substances, activities, and there is a desensitization, whereas other things become more just not as important to you. And there's a sensitization where whatever you're addicted to, you become hyper focused on that one thing. And even with some of my clients, sometimes their addiction is specifically down to one specific porn star.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
So, can that also hold true for a specific sexual act or a specific visual or it can get specific? Yes. Okay.
Yes. All right. So, and Jessica, please, I hope I wasn't too prying there. You've been so forward with everything. And
yes, please ask. And so with that, usually when I was with him, I would just basically white knuckle it all night long with these crazy urges, but I didn't want the solo pleasure. I wanted the connection piece.
The actual experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so it was like a constant state of torture. It was not fun at all. And then when we would have our off periods where we weren't together, I would definitely have my Rolodex.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I didn't even know I was involved in an addiction or that I had an addiction. I knew, my intellectual mind knew that elevated oxytocin was an absolute requirement for me to heal from my PTSD. And healing from PTSD was a requirement for my physical body to heal from the chronic illness of siblings and all the things. So I knew, and I was like, oh, this is just the inner wisdom of my subconscious mind, knowing one of the strongest ways to get elevated oxytocin is through a sexual experience. And so
certainly the quickest.
And so I also planted the belief that I desperately needed a lot of sexual experiences for my healing journey to take place. And so there was that belief attached to it, which then I think strengthened it, probably.
Well, that becomes tough too, because again, not to put words in your mouth, but you sort of identified the neurotransmitter you were running after. And then once you planted that seed, the rest of that sort of feels logical, right? You're like, oh, well, I'm sure there's a supplement for everything. I'm sure there's a supplement out there that could help you endogenously boost oxytocin levels, but surely the quickest route is to get touched, right? Yeah. Or to touch someone, right? So it seems like,
it's weird though, because oxytocin's also a partnering. It's a bonding compound, right? So when mothers breastfeed, that's released.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's it's weird because yes, sexual occurrences do stimulate that, but it's not just that,
right.
But that could also be super jarring if your oxytocin levels spiking and you're expecting that bonding to happen, and you've got some nudnik like this guy.
We see it happen actually a lot, where with one night stands where one of the partners is very upset after that.
Right.
Well, I thought we had a thing. No, we had sex.
Yeah, right. We had sex. Yeah, totally different. Yeah.
And
I had a thing. I don't know if you had a thing.
Yeah, well, and that's normally what happens.
Yeah, right.
And the oxytocin boost. Did you have the oxytocin boost?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I've never phrased it to a partner like that, but that would be funny.
It's super sexual. It's super kinky. Yeah,
oxytocin is crazy.
Talking neurotransmitter levels. Really, you'll pull so much tail.
Science. I was trying to acquire oxytocin other ways. I actually was calling the local hospitals to see if they had programs where you could hold newborn babies without mothers to get that.
See, you're a girl. You could ask that question and not get thrown in jail. I can't.
I don't. I have my younger one's a preemie, and she spent 83 days in the NICU, and they had seniors like from senior centers volunteering to come in and hold the babies.
Oh wow!
And I mean, it was males and females. I mean, I was greatly impressed with the amount of care that people were giving. So yeah, that's a great way too. The physical touch that's non-sexual also does it too.
Yeah.
So Jessica, did you sort of have did you wake up one day and kind of like, did your own hypersexuality lead to sort of addiction recovery in others? Like, is there any correlation there, or was this just sort of a side note in your journey? I don't know. I'm just kind of curious how related they are.
It did, but there's an important part of the story. Can I tell?
Oh God,
absolutely.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so getting the ciguatera neurotoxin illness gave me the brain damage, gave me the adult PTSD. My nervous system and everything was haywire. And then it created hypersexuality disorder as a coping mechanism. What I realized is that there were pre-existing patterns in my subconscious mind that existed on that sexual scale before the brain damage happened. And so when paying attention, it's saying, oftentimes when we have something traumatic as an adult and then these big things happen, almost always there's something pre-existing, some pre-existing subconscious programming taking place. And so kind of touching on the sexuality piece, I had kind of learned that, I had a childhood trauma that I didn't really know about until I was learning about my adult trauma. And then I had realized that I had used my sexual experiences as a way to feel valuable and to try to achieve subconscious self-worth. Was, okay, how do I not get rejected? How do I be accepted? Get attention from men. And I think I remember the very first experience I ever had, and it was such a neurochemical high and rush in my body. And I was walking with my cousin across the Fox River in McHenry, Illinois. And I think we were maybe about 14 years old, walking across the bridge, and we had our shorts on. I think I had a halter top on, and like this truck drove by and like whistled at us and gave some like sexual gesture. And then my cousin told me what it meant. Like I remember my whole body getting like this full-on rush. It was an extreme dopamine high. And in that moment, my subconscious mind goes, this is how you're valuable. Boom.
Yeah, fascinating.
Subconscious programming locked in hard. And the way that I wanted to dress changed. I just wanted to dress in a way to get the attention from males.
Which must have landed real well in your Jehovah's Witness house. that probably went over
got kicked out.
like a fart in church now, didn't it? You're like, what are you doing here? This is not right.
I was sneaky and knew how to get away with things. Usually.
But I'm sure that that probably opened up a whole can of worms with a dissonance between what you'd been told for 13 and a half prior years to that, like from a religious context, into like what you're now feeling in a physical context. You're like, this should be easy to sort through. Yeah.
But it was, but my subconscious mind goes, this is what you need. My subconscious mind said, you need men to be very sexually attracted to you, and you need to do whatever it takes to make that happen. You need to dress, do the things, and whatever it is for that. And
so are you saying that sort of calmed down until your adult trauma was kind of starting to unpack, and then you kind of reconnected the dots years later?
I almost feel like maybe it didn't even register, right? It might have just been sitting there in the background,
Oh no, I was acting on it. You
were aware that was the moment, even at 14.
No, it wasn't until this year that I became aware of that moment.
Yeah,
it wasn't even that long ago. I don't remember what I was doing. I think someone asked me a question in an email, and it triggered this memory earlier this year. I was like, holy shit.
That makes so funny how that works, isn't it? Yeah.
And So going back to my hypersexuality disorder, what it was my subconscious mind became addicted to external validation. That was really what it was. And it says, oh, what's the activity that can be provided? That sexual experience. And it was almost like the activity didn't matter, but what we're really after is that external validation, because that's the only way that my subconscious mind knew how to feel of any value, because I didn't know how to create it from within because of the childhood trauma that I had experienced. And so I had realized that also in my adult years, like in my 20s, I would go out and behave in a way that I became basically like the extreme extrovert. But what that was, you could kind of call it like an addiction to external validation, because every moment of time I had that was free time, it was, okay, always have a big enough circle of friends that you will always have someone to spend time with. And it was spending time with people in a way that I would receive the external validations to feel valuable. So I needed to get my hit of value. And that tied into the sexual experience, but tied into non-sexual social experiences as well. Which those can lead on narcissistic, on the spectrum of narcissism. Some of the ways that people behave, like narcissists are actually the people who hate themselves the most, but go out and behave in the most charismatic way. Usually the most charismatic extroverts are narcissists.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard that said before in a variety of ways, and it is kind of funny how that works, right? But at the same time, similar to a couple other things we've talked about on this call, like when you peel it back, it kind of makes sense, right? This is like my armor against the world finding out just how much I hate myself, right? Like that seems not illogical, right?
Yeah. And I promise I'll answer your questions now.
No, please listen. I mean, honestly, this is, I cannot put into words how interesting this is.
I felt like I was bogarting your podcast.
No, not even a little bit. I mean, honestly, it's one of these topics where I'm kind of like, I know, I feel like I've got a million questions. I just don't know what any of them are, right? Like, it's like, so you just kind of have to kind of take it as it's coming along, because it is a complex problem, like, but it's made muddier because it is also like a social joke, right? Like, I'm sure you're much more sensitive to it than I would be, but like, I'm a guy, I'm on 50 text chains with different groups of guys for different things, and not one of them doesn't have a very heavy sexual overtone at most times, right? Like it's just part of the culture, if you will, right? I mean, on any given day of the week, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, holidays, doesn't matter. Somebody's cracking a penis joke or a big tits joke or the 25 boobs of Christmas conversation, like calendar. Oh, nice. Yeah. This advent calendar that's going around right now has like these Instagram chicks who just flash their boobs in a different way, but it's like an advent calendar. And you're like, oh,
I haven't seen that. Why has no one sent that to me?
Yeah, I can send it to you when I'm done. When we're done here,
it's all right.
Yeah, But I mean, it's funny. It's like it's funny because it's made into a joke all the time, every time. Which I think, and again, I'm not a psychiatrist, obviously, but I got to imagine that casual relationship with sexuality in general makes it difficult to discern this is now a problem versus this is just fun. Like,
yeah, well, I'll be the first to say that I love dick jokes. I absolutely love dick jokes.
Well, that's good to know.
The casualness of it, to me, it absolutely feels like it cheapens the sexual experience when you're actually engaging in the sexual experience. And to me, that is one of the most amazing, like fundamental, incredibly amazing, I said amazing twice.
That's fine.
Experiences that a person can have. And I think for me, it can be a deeply spiritual experience. And I mean, when you take it to certain levels and with certain intentions, it will make every single area of your life better in a way that, this is just me speaking, like I wouldn't want to be exposed to it so constantly, because then it kind of like numbs me out to the real thing.
Right.
And the real thing is just like less stimulating. And that's the thing I would want to be like the most stimulating and exciting, and explore it to these way deeper levels, and even creating a neurochemical concoction in your mind and body that is replicating psychedelic drugs from this sexual experience. And there can be these incredible, just monumental spiritual experiences. There can be trauma healing. There's a lot of emotional relief that can happen through the sexual experience. Actually, is really incredible. And then the body can go into involuntary movements where the subconscious mind is releasing all sorts of physical tension from stored stresses.
But like that goes back to what we were talking about that, father ejaculating and you choosing life. Like people don't ask these questions. And like, I think these days people ask even less sexual questions. Like, and I'll give you a quick example. How many times have you heard somebody almost brag about how fast their partner could ejaculate? Like, oh, we fucked for 10 seconds and it was like, or 2-pump chump, we've heard there's a million words for it, right? Like we've normalized sex as a utilitarian function, right? Like I'm just here to put my dick in you and come. That's it.
Period. Well, that's also, I would say that's also religious there, right? Especially Judeo-Christian ones where it's like, no, we have sex to procreate.
Right.
And I should say all Abrahamian religions, not just.
Yeah, don't want to pick on anyone in particular. This is we dislike.
You're all fucking wrong.
Yeah, you're all fucking wrong. Yeah, but I mean, you see what I'm saying, Jessica? Like it's like we've normalized an abnormal relationship with sex. Like there's no reason why anybody should be bragging about how quick they can fuck.
And it's such a weird thing. We all the hangups, all the taboos, all the things about it, and arguably it's after eating and breathing, it's. Maybe shitting.
It's next on the list.
It's like what do we do as a species?
Right.
I mean, it's one of the most biological things that we do, and yet we really have, in one way, overshot it, and in another way, don't really understand it at all.
Right. I mean, I remember. Okay, so there were a few times. I mean, I never really got into pornography. It just never really did it for me. I think I was always after that human connection piece.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember in my early 20s when I was with a man who, in hindsight, I realized he was addicted to pornography. He needed pornography in order to get an erection. And so he would request if we could watch pornography when we were having sex. And I realized that that's why he needed to watch it, and, in order to make stuff happen.
Yeah.
But I remember at that time period in my early 20s thinking, I am so proud of how progressive I am. Yeah. I'm a woman who watches pornography.
Yeah.
And I used to be a Jehovah's Witness. And oh, how ignorant I was, because I didn't know like the psychological and neurological damage that it can do, and how it can create a disconnect from your real life sexual partners. And I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, because everyone has different values.
Mm-hmm.
And it really comes down to values. What do you value? And so you could say if you value that stronger connection piece with another person, then from an intellectual understanding, you could say like, okay, I really don't want to have pornography in my life necessarily. But then there's some people who will feel like they use pornography to connect together during the sexual experience, but oftentimes then their partner becomes a glorified masturbation tool because they're using pornography as the actual stimulator of arousal.
Yeah, sort of outsourcing that component to a third party.
Yeah, and it's saying
or a 10 party, depending on what you're watching, I guess.
Yeah. And so you're like, okay, if you don't value that connection piece, then that's okay. But then that begs a deeper question. If you don't value that connection piece with another person, I'm going to call that trauma.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so is that part of your process with
I was about to say, how do we undo this?
Yeah, like is that part of your process with your clients? I mean, are you kind of attacking it from that standpoint, like as your keystone block, like if you will, like or what is the keystone block of this process?
Yeah. So essentially, I never ever 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 choose or decide anything that my clients want for themselves. Say like, all right, you come to the table with what you want for yourself. And if you're not totally clear on that, which they never are, I say, this is how you become totally and utterly clear on who you want to be, what you want your identity to be. We focus on identity. And that is all the subconscious programming makes up our identity. All of that subconscious programming makes up our identity. And so we go super deep into identifying the limiting subconscious programming patterns. Saying, okay, let's become hyper aware of what all of those are. Every time we become aware of one, then that's this is where I have the 3Ds: detect, define, download. That's detect. We're going to detect what they are, and then we're going to define what you would rather have that be instead. Define the new pattern you want to be in your identity. When that same old trigger shows up in the world, what do you want the new subconscious programming to be? Your
it's
emotional
like a neurological find and replace.
Exactly, yeah. But just because you define what it is doesn't mean you begin showing up that way.
Sure.
Because otherwise you say, oh, I don't want to be addicted to this thing anymore. I've defined that for myself. It doesn't mean that the addiction is away just because you've defined it. And that's true for any habit. This falls for any habit. And we can call extreme habits addictions. And so we define it, but then we need the third D, which is download. Download it into your subconscious programming. The new thing you've defined for yourself, download it. And then we use subconscious strategies to essentially reprogram your subconscious mind so you begin to show up in that new way that you have defined for yourself.
That's interesting. And what would be, I mean, do you have a couple of examples like that download piece? Like, I assume that's the yeoman's work of your of your process, right? Like, walk us through that a little bit.
I teach my clients self-hypnosis. I don't always call it that because a lot of people will shy away from the term hypnosis, and people will say, I'm not hypnosable. And like, well, anytime we've ever been daydreaming, that is unguided hypnosis. So, your brainwave like frequencies and the state that you're in. Whenever we are really engaged in listening to storytelling or watching Netflix or whatever, the moment you are really engaged and you have an emotional response, you have been hypnotically engaged. Because your subconscious mind believes that it's true and is engaged in it. And it actually, those are forms of hypnosis. Pornography can be highly hypnotic. And hypnotic states, there's the traditional hypnosis that we all think of, but then there's a hypnotic state where we have a lowering of the brain wavelength frequencies, open up the subconscious mind, become more suggestible. When we're watching Netflix and you have an emotional response, it's because you're suggestible to it. Your subconscious mind believed the suggestion in the show, and you were hypnotized into believing it on a subconscious level.
And I love that state of existence. I have some of my greatest sort of like detangling breakthroughs when I'm watching some stupid Hallmark movie with my wife, like where you're like hearing a story and you're engaging with it, but that part of your brain just kind of blows open and you're like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. I can see something that I couldn't see. I love that state of mind.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it feels good and it's fun, like if you can do it. And I know we've talked about flow state on here before, and we have a mutual friend who's done a lot of work in that flow state, space, if you will. And a lot of it is neurotransmitter related, right? A lot of that is identifying, his define phase is like, oh, this is a imbalance of, oxytocin versus, what is it, like 12 neurotransmitters he's got to fix on all of them, whatever, and so, yeah, so okay, so we're downloading it, like, so we're hypnotizing. I mean, is that really sort of, I don't want to say the finish line, but I mean, is that sort of like a rinse and repeat of a cycle, right? Like we're going to, yeah. Okay.
You can call that placebo effect. Placebo effect is self-hypnosis. Placebo effect is self-hypnosis. Sure. I like to call it strength of mind technique, because your mind is so strong, so powerful that you can believe these things and make neurochemical and epigenetic shifts within your body. And it's incredible.
Yeah, we read an article once, I think we've talked about it here, Tom, about how Google was the first demonstrable epigenetic change intragenerationally, where you
Yeah.
basically rewired our brains to shed off a portion of our long-term memory because we could outsource it to Google.
To something else. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have to actually remember shit anymore. You know, I make fun of my 50-year-old.
I don't even know if it was Google, because it could have been just the advent of even a cell phone where you had numbers stored.
Yeah, I mean, when we were kids,
I have no idea. Both my kids have a cell phone. I can't tell you what their phone numbers are.
I couldn't either. I could tell you my wife's and one other person, my roommate from college, who we lived together, our first apartment out of college, and like those are the only two humans on earth that I could tell you what their phone numbers are.
I remember my two phone numbers growing up. That's it. That's it. Like, I had two phone numbers. That was it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, mine was 644 Matt, so mine was a little easier to understand.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
That is, yeah.
I thought it was so cool.
My dad's he's had his same cell phone number since before I ever had a cell phone. So
Sure.
I remember that. And then my house number growing up.
Yeah, but so like that's a great example. Like, we don't have to remember that anymore. And as much as I want to rib my 15-year-old for having the memory of a housefly, he doesn't have to. Like, it's like an empty making fun of somebody. Like, it doesn't mean anything. It's like, okay, so what? Like he looks at it like that. Like, this is not getting me the way you think it is getting me. So we could keep going if you want, but feel free to stop at any point.
Forget about it.
Yeah, well, he just doesn't even care, right? Like, but it is funny. So if I'm rewiring like that, I mean, do you see this process? Like, what's the time event on this kind of process? I know it's different for every person and every journey and the severity of this and that, but like, is this something people can kind of get their head around in days to weeks, or is it like months to years?
I mean, it can take, days and weeks to intellectually understand everything that you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as what are you changing? What severity of PTSD or childhood trauma are you showing up to the table with? To what degree is your trust in the process? Because that trust factor is going to massively influence the results that you get with any modality.
Sure.
No matter what. I had a conversation with a client yesterday because we recognize one of his patterns is every single healing modality that he has ever heard of, his pattern is to begin to poke holes in it. And now he doesn't trust it, therefore it will never work for him.
Yeah, we know a lot of people like that.
So
we all know a lot of people like that. Some of us are that person, right? Like, I get it.
Yeah, I think it depends on the topic, right? Oh, I don't want to do that, so here's why
12 ways
it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then once people do, I mean, look, real quick sort of side observation here. There's a group of people listening to this right now that would be like, who is this chick? She's not a psychiatrist. She doesn't have a degree. To my knowledge, she doesn't have a degree in psychology. Like, what would you say to people that sort of think that this belongs more in the sphere of psychiatric help versus, some woman who lives in the woods in Northern California who likes owls?
I would say that I've had licensed therapists enter my program when they themselves were not able to overcome their own pornography addiction.
Wow.
So there's that for starters.
Yeah, no, that's powerful.
I had another one reach out to me actually a few days ago asking for help.
Oh, wow. That's got to be validating, doesn't it? Like, I mean, not to get funny with it, but like, that's got to be validating when you're like, wait a minute, this person is a licensed therapist with many more letters after their name than I have. And yet here we are,
right.
That's got to be pretty validating.
You know what? And to Jessica's credit here, when I have somebody coming in with chronic illness, right, and they are the only experts, right? It's not their MD. It's certainly not me. And a lot of what she was talking about, right? It wasn't, say, a porn addiction, but a lot of those things she had to overcome and learn how to reprogram herself with are immediately applicable to that. So it's a skill set that I'd say would transfer pretty smoothly. And, just like there's like no one guru for everything, the people that are seeking her out are probably going, wow, she found a method that seemed to work. Maybe not, they don't know the whole backstory, I'm assuming, Jessica. But within that, she has this method that she's gone through herself, and that experience helps her redefine things for other people.
Yeah, I mean, to me,
I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth
this
there.
conversation to me makes me think she's got like 3 PhDs in this thing, right? Like, so like, this is definitely not a problem I suffer from, but I mean, look,
you know, we're at a point though, where the degree is meaningless. If you know, you don't like, you become passionate about something, you have an interest, you're going to learn, like, isn't that, what Richard Saul Westerman, why can't I think of his name? TED Talk guy.
Richard Saul Werman. Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, we learn what we like, right? So we have an affinity for something. We start to internalize that. And then you're really the expert. PhDs are not that they're overrated. They're necessary, but they're not. What are you doing to make that clinically applicable too? That's the question.
It wasn't a question, Jessica, to indict the process. It was just sort of like, I think one thing I run into a lot when I start talking about stuff like this, my brother is a great example. He like is a guy who wants to poke holes in a lot of things. And when we were talking about COVID, for example, like back when COVID was like, you know, in the height of it, he's like, you're not a fucking doctor. And I noticed he only got to that point when he got frustrated, because when I start talking about it from a logic standpoint, which is all we had to go on back then, right? It was like, none of us knew shit about the mechanism of action of COVID. There was things that felt right, there was things that felt wrong, and there's things we knew and things we knew were right or wrong, right? And that's all it was. But when you get somebody with a limiting belief structure that holds them in a position that they can't move from, that manifests in frustration pretty quickly, right? Like, and that's when you get people being like, fuck you, you're not a doctor. And I feel like that is, in this particular regard, I feel like anybody dealing with addiction, I got to imagine that fuck you, fuck off mentality is probably always right under the surface. Like, I don't want to be told I'm addicted to this. I don't want to be told this is wrong. I don't want to be told I need help. Right? Like, even if they came to you.
Yeah. And that's why I don't ever put any effort or energy in trying to convince someone to make the decision to change. I never put energy there. I raise my hand to help the men who have already made that decision, that they know absolutely they want to heal and overcome this. Because I could help, 10 men versus one if I'm trying to convince someone.
Sure.
Yeah.
And
so just, I guess you get through your process, right? And like, how do we measure success in this? And I guess, what is the sort of observable outcome of these people post therapy, whatever successful therapy looks like?
There's different ways you could measure success. Usually the most important one is your emotional your emotional quality of life is the most important one, really. But there's measurable ways like, oh, I've gone X number of days, weeks, months, or years since I've relapsed. That's a measurable thing. But one of the things that is so important is that we don't just do what I call addiction whack-a-mole, where if you are trying to quit one addiction, if you don't address it at the root cause and holistically, then another addiction will pop up. Either one that you've already been maybe dabbling in, but you wouldn't have called it an addiction. Maybe it becomes an addiction. Or you discover a new thing. And oftentimes, addictive choices and behaviors don't come solo. They're normally paired. And so a lot of times my clients will show up and they realize, oh, I have all of these other escapism behaviors and activities that I engage in. And so we have to address all of the escapism behaviors and identify every escapism behavior that when they choose to engage in that behavior, it weakens their neurology to be able to be resilient to stress versus strengthens it. And so a lot of times my clients will come in with a certain goal set. And then once they get in the course, they actually their goals of what they want for themselves become so much larger because they see the possibilities and they can see what's going on a more in-depth level with them. So that kind of creates them to like, oh, I have to do this, this, and this. But also, in addition to that, I see that I can create something better for myself than I even imagined. Right. So often what they're coming to the table with is so much smaller than what their goal, as far as their goal is concerned, is so much smaller than what they're able to accomplish. And so as far as measuring that, or how do we know when you're successful, that's really each individual define that for themselves. And the amazing thing is when you learn these strategies and techniques, you automatically begin to apply them to yourself for the rest of your life. So you're on a constant upgrade. And the way that you learn it, it's forced accountability. With like, everything is so forced accountability. And the way that I teach my clients, it's like you can no longer point blame. And when you have that, when you hold yourself accountable, that is the strongest place you can be, because you know that you must be the individual who takes the action before life gets better, rather than another person doing something or a circumstance outside of you changing. And it's the most empowering place to be. And now they're in that place for the rest of their lives.
That sounds awesome. So like, it seems like your clients are more than willing to tell their friends about you, kind of situation, right? Like this isn't something that they kind of live with in private, right? Like they're like, dude, you got to talk to this girl. She's amazing. Like, is that an experience that you have, or like, how did that, I mean, I guess that's sort of, with a topic this sensitive, it's sort of like, well, maybe the right question to ask is, how many people do they know that they're telling about this? Like in a success state, not in a therapy state, right? Like,
Right. Yeah. It's, some of them have gone on to make video testimonies for me.
Oh,
and
wow.
They know anyone in the world who clicks on my site can see them, can see that.
Yeah.
And
no hiding that. So.
Some of them have talked to really high up members in their church to try and be like, hey, in this, porn addiction is rampant in our church and you're high up. And I think Jessica Jordan and her solution is the solution for our church with this problem. And I've heard
you do have an interesting leg to stand on there, don't you? Like you have an interesting perspective there that for the marketer in me now goes crazy. It's like, yeah, you should lean in on that, because like you've got a story to tell there, right? And
and the marketing part has been quintessentially the most challenging piece for me, because I know I have a program that works amazing. And the hardest thing is getting the message out to the men who need the service and want the service.
Yeah. Interesting.
So speaking of that, because I think we're running long and we're going to wrap up in a minute. Tell people how they can find you.
Yeah. So selfcraftedking.com. Picture a crown.
Does that sound masturbatory to you? I mean, I'm sorry. I know maybe I'm just like primed for this, but that seems very, very on the nose here. But where'd that come from? Just out of curiosity.
Well, self-crafted, each individual who comes to the program, they decide exactly who they want to be as an individual. Me as their coach, I will never shape or form who they want to be. I will only provide the tools and strategies for them to become the man that they choose to become.
Interesting.
And so self-crafted, and then king for two reasons. The addiction no longer has rule and dominion over who they are and their life and their identity and their choices. They are the king, the ruler of their own lives, of their own identity, of their own choices. And then two, a king's job and role is to be of service to others. And we as human beings, no matter who we are, I believe that it is so innately part of who we are to want to be of service to others. And we all step into that role as long as we are not struggling and suffering so much that we can't step into the role of being of service to others. And being so laid down heavy by an addiction, it can be really difficult to be of service to others because you're so focused on not suffering.
Right. Well, I mean, listen, I'll be honest with you. This is intriguing. I could literally talk to you for a day straight on this. It's super fascinating, but it's really not just the porn addiction. I honestly thought we'd spend more time talking about that, but quite frankly, the rest of your story is actually so much more
so great. Yeah.
Intriguing than this, as I suspect. I mean, it's often the case, right? Like, but I think what I took away from this more than anything else is that the thing that brought you to where you're at is something that's so much more universally applicable than just this narrow domicile of porn addiction, right? Like, I mean, yes, your outer manifestation of this superpower is there, but if somebody were to listen to this and like really internalize anything you've said, let alone all of it, like this could be way useful in so many other ways, right? Like and going back to that theme for me anyway, that repeated all this conversation is like, we just aren't asking ourselves the right questions enough. You know what I mean? Like, it takes something big to move us into a space of having to ask these questions, right? Like, I had to have brain damage to ask this question of myself, or I had to have hypersexuality disorder to ask this of myself. Well, why? You know, like, why couldn't we? Maybe I never thought to ask about my father's ejaculation, right? Like, that was just never a thing that I thought about, right? But like, it's just like somebody asked you that for the first time and you're like, oh, well, that's a thing now. Now I leave this conversation with like 100 of those new things to kind of like anchor into. I don't know, Tom, maybe I'm being a little too woo.
No. I mean, you're kind of hitting the nail on the head, right? I mean, we don't, as humans, we tend to ignore the small signs, right? So, I mean, if we were really in tune with who we were, that first little nudge, right? You know, people don't come to me to the clinic when, you know, hey man, I noticed this tiny little thing. It's like, no, I fucked up my shoulder.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, no, what, okay. So what did you do for the 5 year? Oh, well, you know, for 30 years I was playing racquetball and, you know, I tear stuff up, but I get back up, you know, and it's like, oh, you didn't at any point in time think this might need some attention. Right. And we do that. We do that with our emotions. We do that with our, you know, I got into a little, you know, fight with the wife, but don't worry, it's okay, right? No, we don't need, you know, couples counseling. We don't need to dive into any of that. We don't until it's like, oh shit, everything's on fire.
Yeah, like my wife's got a suitcase at the front door walking out. I should probably deal with this.
Now we should probably deal with this, right?
Maybe we should talk about this.
Those subtle signs, we're so overstimulated with so many things that. Like even Jessica said it, right? Here's a memory that happened when she was 14 that for years and years
just sat on the shelf.
Was sitting there. Yeah. Why it happened. I mean, even when I talk about how I got into acupuncture, I didn't remember my experience with my grandfather telling me that he was counting pills out for somebody. I was watching him count pills out for somebody and he goes, this is going to be, you know, $15 a day for this guy. And he's a day laborer. That's every day for the rest of his life. And he said, you got to find a better way. And it was like, well, that didn't register until I was at acupuncture school. One day I'm putting a needle in somebody. I'm like, oh shit, that happened. Like, oh, that's the origin story, you know?
Well, and it's funny. I was reminded of a phrase that says like, eat your food as vitamins or else you'll be eating your vitamins as food.
Yeah.
And that there's so much wisdom in that sort of little phrase, because I think all too often we're not eating food as vitamins. We're just eating food because we're hungry and like we're going to stuff something in there to make that go away.
Well, even last week when we were watching that $2 million man special, right? It's eating for him is very utilitarian, right?
Yeah, Jessica, we watched Brian Johnson, his journey last week. He spends $2 million a year on life extension, and he's open sourcing the results. Like, and it's like, so he's not selling all anything.
His shit.
You can download it all. It's free. That's
amazing.
Yeah,
and I want to be 30.
Yeah, trust me. You. Yeah, I mean,
the older I get, the less long I want to live. Which is,
but if you were asking better questions, you know, like, so.
What would it take for you to want to live to 100?
That's right. Yeah.
I would prefer enlightenment, and not have to reincarnate.
Yeah, right. A little easier to solve this problem rather than the other one.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, reincarnation throws the dice. You're like, shit, this could go either way. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, it does give you some incentive to fix shit, even if you're cashing out. You know?
Right. Well, Jessica, anything you want to add before we take off? Because I honestly can't tell you how much I thank you for the time.
You know,
No, I feel like there are so many things uncovered. So if you ever want to do a round two, this was so
fun. Yeah. Don't tempt me.
Like,
yeah.
In my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many fundamental things that we didn't even touch, but it felt very amazing and refreshing. And it felt like a really great opportunity for me to speak about a lot of the parts of my story I don't talk about too often. And I want to say thank you for allowing me that opportunity.
Oh my God. The pleasure is definitely all mine for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun, and freeform tends to work best with us, Jessica. If it's scripted, it doesn't It doesn't flow.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's definitely the problem with this curiosity is that it doesn't really play well with scripting, right? Like you can't really, and Tom and I actually in our earlier episodes got like really struggled with that a little bit, trying to find like a quote unquote formula that worked for this.
We're going to talk about this, then we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to wrap up like this.
Yeah. And it really didn't work. I mean, it gave some structure to it, you know, like for example, we're at an hour and a half now. We're typically wrapping up at 45 minutes, 50 minutes. That was just because we thought people were getting bored. But like, honestly, a conversation like this could easily be a 4-hour podcast and I'd still be listening. Right. Like,
well, you know, and that's when we start going, okay, we'll have you back.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, let's get into it.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much again. I really, really, really appreciate you. And thank you for being around.
Yeah. And thanks for making this happen. I'm glad you were up to it today. This is great.
Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, this was super fun for me.
All right. Well, guys, see you next time.
Take care.
Take care.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.